Hey, welcome back to the Flex Diet podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we've got an awesome program with my buddy Brent Uken, where we are going deep on all things fishy. That's right, fish oil in terms of supplementation, omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. We'll explain what those are and even talk about different types of supplements, such as arachidonic acid. Are there ways that you can improve your fatty acid balance? And just why are these fats so important? And we also get the inside scoop on a new study that he is doing. We won't have the results for a while, but super fascinating. And also, if you're interested in improving your tolerance to stress, potentially reducing your resting heart rate, increasing your cardiovascular health, and maybe even increasing your performance in the gym at the same time, definitely check out this interview. If you enjoy all things in the realm of nutrition and recovery, make sure to check out the Flex Diet podcast here, and also spot to you by the Flex Diet certification. So as of listening to this one on January 11th, Monday, 2020, the Flex Diet certification will be open for about 1 week. So go to flexdiet.com or hit me up and you will be able to register there. Right now, the Flex Diet Cert opens about 4 times per year. So if you want a complete system of how to do nutrition for both yourself and your clients, in terms of prioritizing the key things to put first and reducing all of the crazy amount of information there, using research and putting it into a complete system that you can use, go to flexdiet.com. So check out this interview from my good buddy Brent, all about fish oil. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy. Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here with the Flex Diet podcast. And I've got my buddy Brent Uken on the show to talk about fish oil and some other cool stuff. How's it going, man?
It's going great. How are you, Dr. Mike?
Doing good. So give us a little bit of background. Like, how did you end up being an older person, no disrespect, to going back to school with all those young folks to learn about fish oil? I say that as an older person myself, which sounds weird to say.
No, none taken, and I've been called much worse. By the way, it was. I think the real story is this, Dr. Mike.
Oh, yes, the caffeine and exercise performance position stand is finally out.
So congratulations on that.
You can ask Trish about that process. It was very long and involved, and I'm happy it's done.
Yeah, she did mention that. But, as far as me heading back to get a master's in exercise physiology at Kennesaw State, I actually retired from a long professional services career in global consulting back in June of 2018. So I had a nice run there, last 20 years as a senior partner, and I've always had a passion for health and fitness. I've been an athlete my entire life, and I knew that retirement was imminent. You know, once you get into your early to mid 50s, you're sort of taking that last lap around the track with those firms. So about 10 years ago, I said, look, what are we going to do when we grow up? Chapter 2 type stuff, and really dove back in to the reading just for pleasure and, for my own personal benefit, and decided, why don't we take the next step? And I went after several of the certifications. So, sort of ran the table at NSCA with the CSCS, TSAC-F, CPT, picked up the CISSN along the way. You had my guy, Adam Fight, on your podcast last month.
Yeah, Adam's a man.
I went through PN, so he was my coach and mentor.
Oh, awesome. Very cool.
It's a very small world in connecting up some of these dots. So
it is.
I actually, and you and I met, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, one of the conferences,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up going through the Carrick program. So part of the original cohort there.
Yeah, for the
And
human performance program, which is great.
yep, yep. So based on my experience with Carrick, and I got to meet Dr. V there, Trisha, and chatted her up, and went to one of the local chapter meetings at Kennesaw State, and she talked to me about potentially joining the program. Showed me the lab and gave me a tour, and we kept the dialogue going, and I joined the program last summer.
Nice.
It's kind of tough to believe I'm starting the last semester next Monday.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. I can't believe it's gone so fast.
Nice. Oh, and that's awesome too to see someone going back and doing what their true passion is too, which it's always super cool to see because I get people that are even quite a bit younger than me that are like, oh, but I just feel like I'm too old to go back to school. And I'm like, dude, I finished my PhD when I was 38, and I know people like yourself who are going back to school that are older, and it just, to me, I don't think age has anything to do with it. It's just, do you want to learn and do you want to put in the work to get the knowledge? If you do, cool, then just go for it.
No, and then you have some pretty funny stories too, like showing up at the bursar's office to make a payment, and they're asking if the payment's for your daughter or
Yeah.
son. For me, so and timing out on the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination, and they're go back to the family doctor. I can't really do that. He's been dead for 30 years.
Yeah.
So
Very cool. So how did you're mainly looking at the effects of fish oil, and how did you get interested in fish oil out of all the different sort of topics and things you could pick to do further in-depth study in?
well, I think in Mike T. Nelson fashion, I think I should formally change my name to N=1. Because I've had a blast with all the personal experimentation with supplements and exercise protocols, and really stumbled into this during the Carrot program when we were talking about HRV. I've been into HRV for a little while, but we've had some great advances with the wearables, for
Yeah.
example, and supplementing HRV for training and elite HRV, and on and on and on. When we talked about that, I actually started to supplement there and noticed some interesting changes. Again, it's all N=1, but because I hadn't changed anything else in terms of exercise protocol, nutrition, and so have you, really started to notice some interesting changes around HRV, resting heart rate. So some of the cardio related benefits with the omega-3 supplementation.
I'm assuming they got better.
Oh, they got significantly better. And again, it's N=1.
Yeah.
The controls, being what they are or not. The other thing I noticed on the blood lipid levels, in addition to the direct measures like the omega-3 index and the N6 to N3 ratio, was looking at my triglyceride levels, which plummeted. My HDL went up significantly.
Do you know about what the changes were for people listening, just for context?
So the my triglycerides were down by about 40%.
Wow, that's a big change.
Yeah, HDL went up by about 30%. So, and the total cholesterol went down significantly too. I consistently was running in the 200 to 220, and it dropped down to 170. So saw those benefits too as a nice side effect of the supplementation. That wasn't why I did it, but going to test and kind of noticing these things, that was a nice pickup. So that was really the launching pad. And I started thinking, gosh, maybe there is something to this. Let me dive into it. So instead of the, developing I'll call it sort of an intellectual interest in running around with the omega-3 hammer looking for the nail, sort of went the other direction. I had some personal experience with it. Maybe the benefits are attributable to it, maybe not, but let me dive in. And the deeper I dove into it, the farther down the rabbit hole I wanted to go. So, realizing that with the phospholipid bilayer that you've got EPA and DHA, integrated into literally every cell in your body.
Yeah, every cell membrane.
Exactly. Differentially so between different parts of the body, like DHA is being picked up more predominantly in the brain, retinal cells, those types of things, is trying to unpack differential effects. So going beyond just the omega-3 interest, really trying to unpack the differences between the two omega-3s that appear to drive most of the health benefits.
Cool. And for context, we're talking about omega-3s are going to be primarily EPA and DHA, and that they actually, like you said, get pulled into the cellular membrane of literally every cell in your body, right? Because I always think of, in terms of a supplement, what are the principal effects, right? Does the physiologic story, even at face value, just logically make sense? And as you said, doesn't mean that it's going to pan out in the research, but if we can't even come up with a story of how this may affect things, maybe we should look at something else out of all the things to look at. And then, as you're doing, go further down into more formal studies to see, does that story actually hold true or not?
Yeah, and you do get some, when you look at the mechanisms of action, and also going back to school, I get to learn a whole raft of new acronyms and great phrases like being able to fully elucidate something. So, to your point, the storyline's there because of the incorporation into the cells. So myocardial cells, endothelial cells, into the sarcolemma. Obviously with you and what you do, you're very focused on, anabolic effects and muscle accretion. So the storyline is there. It's really trying to dive into some of these, I'll call them new. They're not new areas per se, but, research takes decades to unfold. This really started to be studied heavily in the 70s, with some of the seminal research where they noticed in the Greenlandic Eskimos the cardioprotective effects in the high fat diets that they were on.
Yeah.
So actually, as you'd expect, the initial research was really around the cardioprotective effects, and inflammation is another huge area, and now it's starting to branch out more heavily. In fact, there was an article that just came out recently. I haven't read it yet.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, so there's more, I'll call it sports related or athletic performance related or human performance related studies within the last probably 10, 20 years that are looking at various effects on endurance athletes, strength, power applications, and so forth. But initially it was really all around the cardioprotective effects and kind of flushing that out.
Yeah, and the Eskimo studies, there was a Dieberg, I think, that
Yep.
that would, if people think back far enough, if they're old enough like we are, that was back when like fat was like demonized. It was like, oh my God, these Eskimos, they're eating all this fat. They must have just massive cardiovascular risk. And then they found the direct opposite. They're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, and I think to that, you tie this to diet and some of the observational data. Plug here for your friend that you hooked me up with, Dr. Beavis.
Yes, yeah.
And looking at the studies. So the N6 to N3 ratio, was a marker for quite some time, and looking at the traditional Western diet, heavy on the pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids. And historically, they said that man sort of gravitated around a 1-to-1 or maybe a 2-to-1 ratio, but very low. And now you see these ratios, 15-to-1, maybe even excess of 20-to-1. Pro-inflammatory to anti-inflammatory, and all the wicked nasties that take place in a chronically elevated high inflammatory body state or biological state.
I had a guy I tested once. He was 40-to-1. So 40, if you go with the ratio, right? So omega-6, so kind of the oils you want to avoid, which is an oversimplification. But and his omega-3 was almost like non-existent. So his ratio was just skewed. And yeah, he got better though. We got him down to somewhat of a normal, I think he ended up being around 10-to-1 or something like that. I don't remember what the exact ratio was at the end, but it was a lot better. He felt a lot better. His, achy joints and all this other weird stuff he had going on kind of cleared up. But that was the worst one I've ever saw.
That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad.
And if you do his dietary analysis, like no fish, like very hardly any, I would say, real food, like tons of fast food, fried food, processed oils. So yeah, it kind of jives with what he was eating.
Yep. Yep, and the other interesting thing around that is the metabolic pathways around the N6 and the N3s, that they share the same enzymes and the same metabolic pathway. So you don't hold your N6 level static while you vary the omega-3 levels. If omega-3 goes up, the omega-6 level will go down because they compete. So if you look at something, and to leverage off one of your points about the inflammatory state is, if 40-1 is bad, we try to drive these things down. And as humans, we tend to, kind of look at these as binary states. Well, therefore, I should just max out. I should just mega dose, like heck.
Yeah.
And if inflammation is bad, could I get to a non-inflammatory state? And, clearly you don't want to do that. I don't think, and I've had prior conversations on this. I don't think you run the risk of completely suppressing your immune system, but you can have some immunosuppressive effects if you go too far for too long.
Yeah.
Anabolic state, we talked about this too in prior conversations. To elicit some of the body's adaptations, you have to have a certain level of inflammation, but if it's elevated, chronically, that's problematic.
Yeah. So you're saying some of the old protocols from like like Poliquin and other people, maybe you don't need 10s to 20 grams of fish oil a day.
Yeah, that is a staggering amount, even if you're taking the
I don't remember the exact amount he recommended, but it was just some astronomical amount. So yeah.
Yeah, I think to that point, one of the other things, and in your newsletters, I think you do a great job of laying this out. Some of the biological concepts that really, are at play here, like homeostasis and curvilinear relationships and things of that nature. Where I'm going with this is it's very alive and well in this area. You have threshold levels and ceiling effects. So, will you be a high responder? Well, it depends. What's your baseline level? So, the gen that you tested that was 40-1, it's going to be a high responder, even at, really low doses, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just so suppressed. But as you start to work your way down in that ratio, you're going to get, it's law of diminishing returns. So there is and if you look at the omega-3 index, the sort of the two cut points are, if you're below 4%, you're sort of in that red or danger zone. If you're above 4%, 5%, 6%, you're not getting the full cardio protective benefits until you get up to about 8%.
Okay. No, that's cool.
Below 8%, you're going to get, you're going to be a higher responder than somebody that's already at a relatively high level.
Yeah, and so the omega-3 index for people listening that's actually, they take the red blood cell, they put it in a little detector and they blow it up and they look at the amount of EPA and DHA that's actually incorporated into the cellular membrane, which is, to me, more useful than, whole blood is a pretty good analogous, but I always like looking at the ratio of what is your whole blood amount, what is your RBC, red blood cell content amount, making sure those are relatively, decent next to each other. So then we know at the end of the day if they're pretty good, but you're just low, that, taking in more omega-3 fish oil is probably going to bump both of them up. I've only seen like one or two cases where those were like really skewed, and I just sent them back to their doc, and they had all sorts of digestion issues, and they were just a metabolic train wreck.
Yeah, since I'm a heavy believer in the applied knowledge, so one of the things, if you are going to supplement, then first of all, from a dietary perspective, oily fish, and mackerel. If you're going to supplement, it's best to take the supplement with a meal containing fat for that very purpose, so that you get better digestion, bioavailability. Another fine point, if people want to get into the details, form can matter, whether or not it's ethyl ester or triglyceride form. So, as with many supplements, you get what you pay for. The more expensive supplements tend to be in a more bioavailable form. Shocker. But making sure that you do your homework on that to get the better supplements. But when you take them, try to take them with a meal containing fat to get the uptake and reduce the GI potential GI impact.
Yeah. So what is the difference between those two for people listening? Like if I take a standard fish oil off of the shelf, what form is that? And could I just potentially take more of that even if it's not as bioavailable? Like, what is the difference, and what are things people should look for?
Yeah, the cheaper versions tend to be the ethyl ester version. The more expensive tend to be the more bioavailable triglyceride version, just in shorthand. And if you look at the label, and it really is key that, and going into this, I thought, well, an omega-3 is an omega-3. There wasn't any, sort of gradation to this, but there are several omega-3s. And you made the point early on, the two that are most important are EPA and DHA. So when you look at the label, you need to make sure that you're actually buying an omega-3 supplement that has EPA and or DHA in it. EPA tends to be the more common of the two. You tend to see these in blends. It's relatively rare to find a DHA only or DHA predominantly based supplement. I found one at GNC that's predominantly DHA, but most are blends. In nature, I think the ratio is 18 to 12 EPA to DHA. So you're going to see more blends at the end of the day, but definitely read the label and make sure that you've got sufficient amounts of both. Some of the cheaper supplements may have literally zero or just trace amounts.
Yeah. And is there a way of looking at the label to know what form it is, or do they have to look at something like a krill oil to know that it's a different form, or how would the consumer be able to tell any difference?
Really tough. They tend to be silent on the labels.
Yeah.
You may be able to pick that up from something like Consumer Lab or somebody that's done a review, or if you want to do the research, maybe call them or go to the website to see. But I haven't found too many that actually put that on the label itself.
Yeah. And I think krill oil is
They're more
technically a phospholipid, is that correct? And that's supposed to be even more bioavailable. So is that true? But it's also significantly more expensive too.
Yeah, and like many of these things, I'll generalize it. It's, could you get a small uptick or more benefit to it? Sure, but is it really worth it at the end of the day? And I've taken the ethyl esters and had good success with those. I've taken the triglyceride form. I've had good success with those. So it's not a wide gap between the different forms. So is it more bioavailable? Absolutely, but does it matter at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Maybe not. I mean, if you're taking and the other thing I'll mention on dose is you want to get at least a gram a day combined of EPA and DHA. That seems to be based on the decades of research, sort of that threshold level. The other thing is consistency. Like many supplements, these things take a while to accumulate in the body for effect. So you're not going to go, dose for a week and think you've solved the problem. You can kind of go back to the way things were. So this literally is one of those supplements that you start taking and potentially take for life.
Yeah. Do you think there any way to hyperload on a fish oil? Meaning that if I got my results and they're super low and I'm one of those crazy people that wants to get to the saturated level in a short period of time, like we know you can do it with creatine, right? Taking 20 grams per day for 4 to 5 days will get you to the same amount of 30 days of doing around 5 grams. But because the pharmacokinetics are different with fish oil and the incorporation rate, is it even possible to hyperdose to get up to a level relatively fast, like say in a week? Or is it better just to take a higher dose for 4 to 6 weeks, get retested, see where you're at, and then kind of come back down on the other side?
It's a great question because the other nuance I picked up in getting acclimated to this area is you got sort of three areas that you can measure the concentration of those two, and one is in plasma. And I'll give an analogy. The best analogy I can give is it's sort of like fasting glucose relative to A1C. So
like that.
You could mega dose, right? And that's in the transport system. I can measure it in plasma, and I can see that within hours. But if you're talking about cell membrane incorporation, they've tied this to the life cycle of a red blood cell. So you're talking 112 days, but basically 4 months ish before you can actually see a significant change as it is incorporated. So you won't see. It's not that there's no change over that period of time, but it's going to take at least 4 months to get the full benefit of the of the supplementation at any dose, 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams.
Yeah.
And there's storage in lipid cells, and that literally takes years.
Yeah. So would you agree that what I've done is if people are pretty low, I've said, this is probably going to be on the higher side. And these are obviously healthy people. We're not treating any diseases or anything like that. But I'm like, I'll probably push a little bit on the higher side, knowing potentially some of the cardiovascular effects, maybe some theoretical performance benefits. So I'll tell them, if you can, take 2 to 3 grams per day of combined EPA, DHA. I normally don't specify what type, just buy a high quality supplement, whatever that ends up being. And then if you really want to know, maybe we'll retest you in like 3 to 4 months and see where you're at. Do you think that's a reasonable type thing, or is there anything you would change in that?
No, I think that's very reasonable. I think, especially if you're splitting that dose, throughout the day, maybe with a morning meal or an evening meal. The only potential issue, and I think it's been significantly mitigated with the advancements in technology and the enteric coatings and things like that, would be any sort of, just general GI distress.
Yeah, the fish burps.
Yeah, well, yeah, fish burps, and if you're not used to, if you don't have a lot of fat in your diet, you may end up with some other GI issues too. And that's, from a side effect perspective, when you look at all the studies, there aren't really any, major adverse effects. Typically, it comes down to some sort of GI issue. So, the only potential fine tuning, to that would be if you have somebody with known GI issues, maybe you start them out at a gram a day to see if there's any impact and graduate it up. But 2 to 3 grams a day is sort of in that sweet spot.
Yeah.
To the pharmacological levels, the prescription levels are 4 grams and north of 4 grams.
Yeah, and that's primarily for high triglycerides. I think they're trying to lower the cutoff, but wasn't the cutoff like triglycerides of like 500 or something, just freaking astronomical?
Yeah. It's But yeah, the prescriptive level, the therapeutic level is 4 grams and above.
Yeah, and I think now for prescription stuff, they're trying to use more mixed EPA and DHA. I know for quite a while they were trying to get more like just purified forms of EPA and DHA, and last I heard they're using more of a mixed form. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, you're right on that one. I think the X factor on this going forward is there are also companies that are starting to produce at scale algal-based.
Yeah.
Omega-3. So the interesting thing there is, going back through this, and again, this was just my ignorance of, it's not the fish per se that have the EPA and the DHA. They get it from eating algae.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for, long-term availability and sustainability, and the green effect, if you will, getting algal-based omega-3s is sort of, potential wave of the future here. It's something that you can sort of, grow ad infinitum if you've got the facilities for it.
Yeah, it's similar with technology. Like if you looked into like astaxanthin, which is a red carotenoid that shows up in shellfish, and they actually make it from this red algae plant. There's like maybe 3 processing sites now. So they're able to get literally the exact same compound, but in a more efficient form. And I remember like years ago talking to Dr. Peter Rouse in California. God, man, this is maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Asking him, I said, well, I have like a vegan and I think fish oil is beneficial, but they won't take fish oil because it's obviously from, fish. And he's like, oh, there's an algae source at that time. And it's ungodly expensive. But it's been cool to see that price has slowly, gone down. And to your point, maybe in the future that becomes even a better alternative. So you don't have to worry about as much environmental stuff, potentially heavy metals, cleaner processing, all of that. It may just replace some of the other fish oil entirely.
Yep. Yeah, we part of the good news is with the study that and Dr. Van Dusseldorp is my senior faculty advisor on the study. We got some grant money for it, which was pretty awesome. But we also had a company approach us to see if they could, and it's an algal form, see if they could supply us for the study. So we're
nice.
Still in conversation with them to see if we have a win-win.
Cool. And briefly, what is the study that you're looking at?
So the study, I'll give you just a quick sidebar. So on the research itself, part of the challenge is because of the incorporation taking, several months. A lot of the prior studies, no surprise, many were 8 to 10 weeks in duration,
Yeah.
trying to measure the effects. So, you're sort of on the borderline, or maybe, below the line of, are you really measuring the right effect, or, the primary effect of incorporation into cells. Our study is going to be a 16-week study. It's going to be men and women, apparently healthy, ages 25 to 50. So trying to hit a different population. There will be an exercise intervention along with this, 3 time points. So, day 0, 8 weeks in, 16 weeks, full blood draw, and a whole host of other biomarkers, resting metabolic rate, get them up on the treadmill and do a great study with the mask, and, measuring pretty much everything that we can. We're going to
Nice.
capture a lot of data, and hopefully, spin out a couple of papers from the study.
Cool. What is kind of your main hypothesis with it?
One of the things that we wanted to look at was, is there a differential effect of DHA and EPA? So the studies out there are from a blended perspective. I'm not saying that there have been none that have examined this, but the predominant number of studies have been on the blend side. So one of the things that we're going to try to do is to see if there is a difference between the two at a similar dose. The other is, regardless of whether it's DHA or EPA, is there an impact from an exercise perspective on things like exercise economy, RPE, resting metabolic rate, HRV, again, something in your wheel.
Yeah.
But all the, cardiovascular related items, to see if there's any, impact there.
Cool. Oh, that sounds awesome. And if all goes well, when is the estimated kind of wrap up time? I know it's been challenging as of late, but to say the least.
So the we were right on the cusp. We got through IRB literally in March. So, right before down. And I had before that, because and I think it was Brent in 2018 that published the best practices of the paper on these types of studies around dose response and threshold levels and duration. Yep. I uncoupled this study from my graduation requirements. So,
cool.
I'm Wise 25, man. Trying to get the degree and get on out there. I said, look, let's do this right. Do something else for that project, and you can maintain your graduation statistics. I'll get the degree in May, but let's have a longer tail to this and do it right.
Yeah.
So we're also looking to have maybe 80 to 100 participants, so we're pretty aggressive with that.
Nice. That's good.
And trying to mitigate the the dropout rate, but 16 weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
So answer you directly on that, if you can onboard, let's say 5 people a week, it's going to take you a few months just to get a full cohort.
Yep.
And any dropouts, and you've got a 4-month study. My estimation is we're probably a good 12 to 18 months. If knock on wood, all goes well.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. No, that sounds awesome. I'm super excited to see the results from that too. And going back to your N-of-1 experiments, I know you did some stuff with arachidonic acid. And what is a theoretical perspective there, more related to kind of potentially muscle building? And it's been out as a supplement for many years. People may recognize it. I remember the first time I heard about it was, maybe over a decade ago, I think, when it first came out as a supplement. And I remember my knee-jerk reaction was, this is a horrible idea, right? Because in my head, I'm like, oh, arachidonic acid, it's a omega-6, it's all bad, it's all pro-inflammatory. And then I started reading some of the studies, and I'm like, well, maybe not. And then fast forward many years, I don't think it's as bad as what I thought, but is it acutely anabolic? I don't know. And anecdotally, I just don't hear of many people using it, but it has some interesting data on it. So kind of what did you find in your N-of-1 experiment on it?
My N=1 was that it really didn't do much for me, but I'd put that into broader context of there's at least 3 or 4 facets. So, you've got age, you've got gender, trained and untrained status. Are you
Yeah.
apparently healthy or not? I mean, there's so many, twists of the Rubik's Cube. So for a male in his early 50s, apparently healthy, I'm way out of that,
Yeah.
25 anabolic window. So, but from this, by that same token, did prevent, muscle, mass decline. I don't know. I didn't really control around that, but there really was no significant muscle accretion during that time. And I was taking we had discussed before, and I took your recommendation on the dosage. I was definitely at the high end of the recommended dose there. What was really interesting to see though was taking a look at because I do this about every 4 months or so with Dr. Bibas is getting my panel on the omega-3s, the omega-3 index, and the N6 to N3 ratio, seeing how that varied during the arachidonic acid supplementation. Clearly, something was happening because the N6 to N3 ratio went up pretty significantly during that time.
And could you show actual blood levels of arachidonic acid did increase? I believe they did. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, significantly. It wasn't just a little blip. It was significant. I don't remember the numbers. Yeah. This was about 1.5 years ago, but it was significant for sure.
Yeah. So do you think to potentially see an effect, if we assume those are a real effect, which again, it's an N of 1, all the caveats, blah, 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 I get that. But there's been some hypothetical stuff that maybe you have to drive down, paradoxically, omega-3 and even EPA and DHA as you increase arachidonic acid to have a better anabolic effect. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, yes. And I think the theory behind, if I understood the CISSN presentation around this appropriately, was, look, if you need an inflammatory stimulus, maybe a higher, maybe a supplementally induced inflammatory level that's higher than normal could produce more of an adaptive effect from an anabolic perspective. That's the theory as I understood it. So, and naturally, because again, during, with that metabolic pathway of, moving up and down between the N6 and N3, naturally, if you're driving N6 up, you're going to drive N3 down. That's just, that's biology.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, shout out to Bill Llewellyn, who did that talk at ISSN that I was at, probably 2-ish years ago now. And he's the main patent holder, inventor of X Factor, which is an arachidonic supplementation through molecular nutrition. And yeah, I mean, he's, to his credit, he's looked at it when everyone else told him he was batshit crazy. And he, did actually help sponsor a bunch of, studies and trying to at least push something a little bit different forward. Again, science is a very long, kind of slow process. We'll see if it turns out to be, beneficial or not. But I always like seeing people who put a lot of thought into it, even if they turn out to be maybe not correct or wrong or whatever word, because it's just not a lot of stuff that turns out to have positive effects. But still super cool to see that he's done a lot of the work in the background to at least kind of push the idea forward.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I, one of the things I have a much deeper appreciation for, now is you and Dr. Fight, went through just how challenging these studies are. And
it's so hard.
Right? I mean, it's ridiculously hard. So, nothing but gratitude for Llewellyn for doing that. And again, if you're looking at, me, early 50s and, clearly a different, biological state at the time, maybe I'm not the right person to be supplementing with that. So, it's that part of the, twisting the Rubik's Cube and looking at all the various combinations.
Yeah. And I make the argument that if we've been looking at the effects of carbohydrates in exercise performance for easily over 100 years. I mean, I think I found a reference was a Montague, like 1896. That was a published reference about athletes eating bread before a competition was supposed to be an ergogenic aid. And we've had the Bergstrom needles since 1963, where we can do muscle biopsies and look directly at, glycogen and muscle fibers. And we've learned a lot. We've got a pretty good idea of how they work. But, fast forward to even some of the stuff looking at, should you do work on depleted muscle glycogen, because maybe you see higher enzymatic, changes and different adaptation in the muscle. And then if you bring carbohydrates back in later, do you see a big benefit? Like Marquette did a study and showed huge changes in like 3 weeks. And then Gail did another study showing no changes in 4 weeks. So something like carbohydrates, which we think, oh my gosh, we must understand this by now, 100 plus years later, we're still like, I'm not really sure on some stuff.
Well, just the challenges of maybe the best you can do is an animal model.
Yeah.
For sort of obvious reasons, or limitations on populations, or study duration, or all the things that you and Dr. Fight went through. I don't need to repeat those ad nauseum, but so many practical limitations on it. You're sort of inferring things and trying to connect up dots, and so.
Yeah. And you're only going to get so many crazy people to get into a study. And you read some of these studies where they did like friggin' 8 muscle biopsies or some crazy stuff. And then you go on the old internet and people are like, oh, but why didn't they do that in elite athletes? It's like, I always tell them, like when I was at the University of Minnesota, Cal Dietz was a coach there, and he's still a coach there. And if I went over and told him like, hey man, I want to grab like your top level college athletes. These are not even elite athletes. These are, high level D1 college athletes. I want to steal them for this training study, nutrition intervention for just 8 weeks. We're going to poke the shit out of them. We're going to do muscle biopsies and all this stuff. He'd tell me to get lost, right? Because his job is to get athletes the best result in the safest way possible. His job is not to loan athletes out to me to do whatever harebrained experiment I want to do on them either. So even if you get to an elite level, especially with invasive stuff, you're asking someone to potentially screw with their career and cost them maybe millions of dollars. So, and all of the other caveats of doing science and experiments and IRB approval and all the other hoops you have to jump through. It's like, of course I want to see that data. Of course I would love to see that. I think it would be amazing. But, there's a lot of real world limitations there that are very hard to get over too.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. So as we wrap up here, for the average person listening, is there any sort of blanket recommendation you would have, which I know is always dangerous, in regards to omega-3 supplementation, or things they should consider doing as action items?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just always give the caveat: I'm not prescribing. I'm not an MD.
Yeah.
I'm not a professional. But all that having been said, I think going back to some of the points that we touched on, I think trying to get a high quality supplement that has a blend of EPA and DHA, at least 1 gram a day. Consume it with a meal so that you don't have any GI distress. Make sure that you're going to commit to take it consistently, because that's really the ticket. It's taking this over time, not just for an acute period. I think is, that's sort of the foundation of the supplementation element. Some of the effects that again, I'll sort of recap that. So the benefits, you're going to get things like lower triglycerides, and that's pretty well documented in some of the other cholesterol related items. Some of the benefits on the cardioprotective. What I've noticed on the exercise side is better efficiency, lower pain thresholds. You're seeing things like ventilatory threshold. So you're starting to see some really interesting pickups, and I've noticed those myself, whether I'm on the rower, whether I'm on the treadmill, same level of effort. Just I'm not feeling as as gassed on some of those exercises. So, but that would be my recommendation.
Cool. Yeah, and that's something that's pretty easy to do. Very, even a high quality fish oil at a couple of grams a day, or even 1 gram a day, isn't really that expensive anymore. So it's something I think is super doable with, at least what we know on research, not much of a potential downside either. So.
Yeah, and to that point, just to be clear, there with all the studies that are out there, really no significant adverse events to speak of at all.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If you want to be found anywhere, is there a place you can be found, or are you just going to keep hiding in the lab?
Well, yeah, I'm sort of aging reverse. I'm a graduate research assistant, so I'm spending a fair amount of time. But no, the best email for me is Brent@omega3study.com, which is a website I set up around our study in case you're interested.
Cool.
take a look at our protocol more deeply. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty heavy on that one. I'm concentrating efforts. I'm not on every platform known to man.
So you're a wise man.
All my time on social media, not in the lab.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and taking the deeper dive and actually going back and doing all the hard work and the research and the reading and all the stuff associated with that. And I'm super excited in about hopefully maybe a year or two to see the results of the study too. So
I appreciate it, Dr. Mike. Thrilled to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Big thanks to Brent for that awesome interview there. I appreciate all the time that he has spent reviewing the literature and setting up a great new study that'll expand what we know about fish oil supplementation going forward. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. As always, we would love any feedback, reviews on whatever platform you are listening to. Please drop us a review there or drop me an email. Currently, as of January 11th, for 2021, for about 7 days, the Flex Diet certification is open for enrollment. So if you want a complete system of how to do nutrition and recovery, everything from protein to fat, we talk about some supplements like fish oil, NEAT, fasting, ketogenic approaches, basic exercise, sleep, and a lot more, go to flexdiet.com, FLEXDIET.com, and you will be able to enroll there. If you enjoyed this interview, we've got a ton of expert interviews there that have not been released anywhere else. Everything from protein featuring Dr. Stu Phillips from McMaster, Dr. Jose Antonio, to flexible dieting with Dr. Eric Helms, sleep and much more, Dr. Dan Party, Dr. Hunter Waldman, Dr. Stephen Guillenet on there talking about how your brain interprets different signals of satiety and hunger, and many other interviews there also. So go to flexdiet.com. It'll be open for about 1 week. If you're listening to this after that period of time, you can still go to the same link and get on the wait list to be notified as soon as it is available again. Thank you so much for listening. Greatly appreciate it. Talk to you all soon.